So, I just saw A Quiet Place Part 2, and I kind of want to talk about it. I don't really do movie reviews on this channel that often, like for new releases anymore, just because it's, I don't know, it's tiring. I don't really enjoy doing it that much. But when I have something to say about something, that's when I do a video. So what do I think about the first Quiet Place? Well, I saw it the summer of 2018, I believe, and I remember just being blown away by it. It was something that I always wanted to make, like something like that. I always had stories in my head when I was a kid about, you know, having creatures that can only hear sound and you can't make any noise. I always had stories like that in my head, and I was so interested to see if they would ever make a movie about it, and they did. And so it was so cool seeing this idea I had in my head for a long time just be put on screen like that. And I thought they did a terrific job with it. I loved the direction, I loved the acting. But over the years after I've rewatched it, one, it doesn't stick with me that much. It's not a forgettable movie by any means, but it's definitely one that doesn't really have that long-lasting feeling in my heart, even though it really hit me when I first saw it. Sometimes you just outgrow movies and you gotta move on. I still really like that movie. I think it's a terrific film. There's just a lot of decisions in there that feel like, okay, well, they're putting themselves in unnecessary danger for no reason. You know, like the whole her having a baby. What were they doing during that time? They should know you shouldn't be making noise in the first place, if you know what I mean. They also should know that that will result in pregnancy. Just, it doesn't make any sense to me. So there are things like that that definitely help it get to a next point where it's like, all right, well, for something suspenseful to happen, this needs to happen. But it's just so dumb sometimes and nonsensical, and sometimes that bothers me personally. Other times it doesn't, because I mean, they're human beings, so they make mistakes, and that's fine. So yeah, I still really like The First Quiet Place. I think it's a terrific film. So in this one, I think, since he's not really in the movie, since spoilers for the first one if you haven't seen it, his character is dead. So this gives him a chance to be a little more creative behind the camera, and he really does. He goes a lot more all out. He just takes moments to just have fun with the camera and the lighting and everything. Speaking of lighting, I'm turning this down. The opening sequence to this film is genuinely one of the best sequences I've ever seen inside of a thriller or a horror movie ever. It is a just non-stop suspense fest. I mean, it's a constant level of what's gonna happen next. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. It's really exciting, it's really tense, and then the rest of the movie happens, and it's not nearly as good as that opening. I think when it comes to my issues with the film, I think it has a lot of problems with developing characters and actually developing the story. Because when I was excited when I first saw these trailers, I was like, this is a cool idea that they're, you know, expanding this world and there's more beyond just their farm, you know. Because the first one is a nice small scale movie just with the family, you know. It doesn't involve that much, and for me personally, someone who wants to be a filmmaker, it was like, you don't need a giant budget in order to make something suspenseful. And I was like, cool. You know, you don't need that many actors, you don't need that many sets, you can work with what you have. In this movie, I was like, all right, they're going a little further, they're developing this world, they're expanding this universe, introducing more characters and ideas. And it doesn't really do that. It just kind of does the same thing the first one does. Just a lot of suspense, a lot of things chasing after people, but just not with the same level of engagement, if that makes sense. Like the first movie kind of got the rules put in place at the beginning with all of these like newspaper articles and things on the TV and things that John Krasinski's character was writing on the walls. So we kind of got this from visual communication. In this one, they don't really establish rules, so they don't really make it clear that more aliens are out there. So because the trailers and the synopsis kind of suggest that there's more than just these aliens. But it's just kind of like they go out and there's more aliens, you know. There's not more they're adding on. And they had moments where I thought they would do something more, and then they just kind of move away and they do something else. You're just with these characters for like the entire time. And I would have to say that I was more invested in Cillian Murphy and Millicent Simmons' character's journey. I thought they were far more interesting. I thought the scenes were much more tense, but they also opened themselves up to more ideas and themes. and they don't really fully grasp and reach for that. And with Emily Blunt and Noah Jupe's character, who are basically in one location for the entire film, this makes the pacing a little clunky for me. I think there are a lot of times where the movie just kind of feels a little disconnected from me, and I'm not fully invested in what's going on, because like I said, they don't establish the rules that well, to a point where I'm like, okay, there's like things here and this here, but it's just the same concept. I just wish they established that a little better, because I didn't really feel that scared when people were sitting down and talking. I wasn't like, an alien's gonna come and get you. I was like, oh, they're just talking to each other. I don't know if this is making sense, but I just wish they established certain things a little better. When it comes to positives, Cillian Murphy, who is, in my opinion, a very underrated actor, he shows up in a lot of Nolan films, and he's doing well for himself, but I just don't think he gets a lot of credit for being an actor who's able to just convey a lot of emotion without saying much. He can say a lot in his face. He does that very well here, since he doesn't talk that much in the movie. He's a very quiet character, so this allows him to use his eyes. It's a very cool acting tactic, and I think he does a very good job in this movie. He's my favorite aspect of the film when it comes to characters. Speaking of characters, wasn't a huge fan of the character work in the film. I don't think it was bad. They don't really develop anyone. They don't talk, but actually expand their character. Usually when they're talking, it's just like about the plot. It's not really about the characters. It doesn't say much about them, so they don't really grow the characters in that way. So they're not as interesting, I think, in this one, because they don't really take the time to really develop the characters. It's always just moving to the next point, to the next point. Krasinski's direction, like I said, is much better in this movie. I think he goes for a lot bigger feel. And this also really helps that it was shot on film. It doesn't have that ugly digital look that most modern movies have today. It's grainy, it has like this raw texture to it, and this also helps me pull into the atmosphere a little more. Like there's a scene where they're sitting around a fire, and you can just feel the heat on your face, because it just establishes atmosphere so well. Things like that. I love the texture. I love how it creates atmosphere. And Krasinski does a very good job in that department. I think it's well edited. When they're at their highs, like the very suspenseful scenes are better than like anything in the first movie, basically. But when it's low, then it's whatever, I guess. It's like a lot of scenes where characters are just sitting around talking or looking at each other doing stuff, and then there's like high moments of like high energy tension where you don't know what the heck is going to happen next. There are scenes where it's just kind of predictable, and then there are scenes where it's like very unpredictable, and in that way it's not that consistent. And that was a little disappointing for me, because the first movie was, despite having issues, it was still consistent in tone and pacing. It moved a lot better, I think. Like there's one scene in here that I won't spoil, where a character is trying to do something to something attacking them, and then there's a character who shows up out of nowhere and just kills them from behind, basically. And it was this moment where I'm like, oh, maybe they could have done something a little more creative in that thing, but they just went for the normal Hollywood movie route. And I'm like, okay. And then there's things here and there that feel genuinely unpredictable, like you don't know what's going to happen. And I love a lot of what it does with small things. You know, there's a lot of times where they work with the smallest things, and they're trying not to make sound. You know, closing a lid or something. You know, the first one dealt with that a lot, but you know, this movie has a lot of action sequences, you know, high energy scenes, but then there are also a lot of moments where it still like takes its time to show that little things are important as well. So I appreciated that. I thought it was a nice little touch. A big disappointment for me, though, was just the way it wrapped up. The way it wrapped up was, I think it just did the same thing the first movie did. When it ended, I was like, oh, that's what we just got. What we got was essentially a movie that's just doing the same thing the first one did, it just plays out in a different way, but certain beats, story beats, it just hits them all the same. And when you come to that ending, you look back at it and you're like, not much was really accomplished. And it's not a bad thing. I don't think what we got was a bad film. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I just want to point out that when you come to that ending, you may be a little disappointed looking back at the rest of the experience, because the movie sets itself up to think that we're going to expand this world and introduce us to new characters, and it's going to be bigger and more actiony, and in a lot of ways it is. And then you come to other scenes, and it's just kind of doing the same thing the first one did. And it comes to the end, and it just ends in like pretty much the same exact way the first one did. And not many questions were answered. To me, it felt very dissatisfying. They're obviously going to make a third one because this one's bound to make money. I hope the third one at least would cover what's going to happen with these aliens. They just don't answer that many questions. And I don't like having I love things to be open to interpretation. I love that. But in the case of these movies, you need to wrap it up in some conclusive way, and this ending did not do that for me. The film overall is a very inconsistent experience. I think it's one that will be enjoyed by a lot of people. A lot of people are going to give this good reviews. I get it. I just don't think it blew me away in any particular way. You know, it didn't really hit me in any way emotionally. It was just a movie that had a lot of great tense moments and then a lot of just okay moments. It wasn't bad. It was just a film that I feel could have took its time to develop things, expand things a little more. Again, the opening scene alone is one of the best opening sequences I've ever seen in a horror movie ever, which the rest of the movie could continue in that manner. So yes, this is a good, solid movie. I have a lot of great things to say. I said them. There's not really one I'm gonna sit down and just say this is like the worst thing ever, and then this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. I don't really like nitpicking, you know, thinking about it too hard, but things I feel like were just a waste of potential, and they could have done something really interesting and they didn't, and that's just too bad. So yeah, it was disappointing in a lot of areas, but what we got was still an entertaining film, and I had a good time with it. So I'm still deciding between a 6 and a 7 out of 10. For right now, I'm going with the 7, but it's probably going to lower. I think it's closer to a 6. A Quiet Place Part 2 is a very, very interesting film, and I think it does what it needs to do well, but didn't really do much for me in an emotional department. So yeah, that was my review of A Quiet Place 2. I don't know why that rhymed. But yeah, I don't really know how to end this review, so I'll just leave it off here. This is Ethan Butler, and I'm out.